Hi, welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of Impact Effectively. I've called this season Impact Around the World because I'm speaking to friends and associates all over the globe that are using NLP and other complementary approaches to make an impact in their own way in their community. For those of you that have not been watching or listening to earlier podcasts, my name is Florence Madden. I'm an NLP trainer and coach based in Cumbria in the north of England. I'm the co-author of a book called Everyday NLP and the author of a book called The Intention Impact Conundrum, on which this whole series of podcasts is based. And I'm delighted that I'm joined today by Charles Ainslie in South Africa. Charles is the director and coach at the Trust Connection, and he's going to tell you all about himself, I hope, and about the work of the Trust Connection. So Charles, it's over to you.
Thank you, Florence. And thank you for having me here. I very much value these opportunities of talking to people like yourself. I think building networks, not just in South Africa, but all around the world, is something that's very close to many of our hearts at the moment. As we develop, and certainly from a Trust Connection point of view, as we develop our way of responding in these momentous times. So yeah, I'm Charles. I'm an NLP trainer in South Africa. I'm based in Cape Town. I work with my colleague, Zainab, and a few years back, I set up the Trust Connection together with a mentor of mine who's very active in what we do. And it's interesting how that came about. So for about 10 years or so before that, I worked very closely with community leaders, mostly in non-profit organizations in communities around South Africa. I would go and look for those below the radar organizations and people who had a heart for giving back and making a difference in a social impact sense in their communities, changing the lives of people who are often not seen and who are often in very difficult circumstances. And for many years, I worked very closely for long periods of time with these community leaders and people who were running these nonprofits. And together we tried different ways and looked at predominantly how we could strengthen their organizations. And what we found made the biggest difference again and again was the personal development work and the NLP training that we were doing with those people who really stuck with it, who really had an intention to embrace the openness and the curiosity and the way of being that NLP offers, that is very close to our sense of what we can contribute at the Trust Connection. So that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And out of that came this opportunity really to really put that front and focus, front and center of what we do, which is really to continue to work with all South Africans. And 3 words really summarize the impact and what we go for, which is really the stepping into what is my sense of purpose? What is my sense of purpose in what I do?
Yeah.
How do I bring inspiration? How do I find inspiration both in myself and within the organization? And how do I accelerate what I'm doing towards, with that sense of purpose and inspiration, how do I accelerate that for the sake of transformation? And that's where I'm introducing this word, transformation. It's a word that for South Africans has connotations of a better future, a hope for finding each other, being able to see the world from each other's points of view. So these universals that are true for many of us in many countries are particularly relevant here. We are as relevant here as in many other places. We are a siloed country. People are in these extreme times being pulled into silos. And that means we slow down in our ability to work together for common purpose of rebuilding, bringing hope and opportunity to people that really need that. South Africa has the biggest Gini coefficient, technical term for inequality gap in the world. And so we play a part, a useful part in using NLP, bringing NLP into the heart of community organizations and private sector organizations. We're all looking at ways in which we can look towards a better future.
You mentioned the word silos. Do you want to say a bit more about what you mean by that and how that actually manifests?
Yeah, that's always a great question. So, the sense of extremes that we see in our communities, in a very real living sense, the poverty gap is increasing. People are struggling for resources in South Africa, traveling distances to work, struggling for economic opportunities. And there's a sense of desperation that comes from that. There's a sense of urgency. And I think what happens, or what we know from NLP, is we default into the ways in which we look at things, so the habitual ways in which I look at the world and I try and sort things out. They may have worked for me in the past, and I kind of go back to those more and more. And so I guess we see an accelerated sense of that. People are, with that urgency, using the means they have and the patterns and the skills they have to try and find a way forward. And because many of us are stuck in our ways, we get more and more apart. We kind of end up more and more separate. And at the heart of transformation for us in South Africa is finding new ways to give a bit of space, to breathe together, to recognize and see each other in different ways. And this comes to a concept that I wanted to introduce, which is the concept of Ubuntu.
It's an interesting word. What does that mean?
So it's an African philosophical mindset, really. We use our NLP to inspire people in this space of mindset flexibility, using mindsets that are useful for us and finding ways of looking at ourselves and what we want that can really make a difference. So Ubuntu means literally, I am because we are. I am because we are. It's a seeming contradiction. And certainly I didn't necessarily grow up with that myself. Although in our communities, that's a very real experienced day-to-day way of looking at how to live, a way of looking at a sense of each of our identities. And that's really interesting, isn't it? It shows that there's an interrelationship that is really respected and looked after, that people see value in this interrelationship that I have automatically with my community.
Yeah.
And that there's strength in it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just hearing the word for the first time this morning. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it's we are not truly ourselves until we have and recognize and are connected with others. Is that?
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. There's a relationship always, not only that I have to myself, and NLP is helping me, and we're working a lot with community leaders to that first level of, well, what is going on? What triggers me? What is going on that I see the world in this way? What are my options and my choices? But there's a recognition then that there's an automatic third entity that is created that is beyond just me and you. It's not only about a connection and seeing the world from your point of view. It's recognizing that we all have a vested interest in the sense of community, this word that we use that can mean 100 different things.
Yeah. What that's bringing to mind is Robert Dilt's idea of the field mind. What else is out there? Something that's intangible and yet present.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that. And I also reference Stephen Gilligan's work around the interrelationship that we have with multiple systems,
yes,
with the collective, with people that have come before us and going after us, with nature, and how it's a misconception that I may have that I just exist by myself. And when I build that sense of relationship, so much more is possible. And it's not just a mind construct. I'm not just presupposing that is real. There's a very real sense of opening and becoming aware of the strength. And that's really very real in the communities in which we work with. You know, where do we go for the next level of way forward? And often it's to community. And how do we move from separate positions? Well, it's not only by taking ourselves into a relationship with one other person, it's about looking to the power and the awareness and the beauty of a community and the strength that that brings.
So, yeah, it's really inspiring listening to what you're doing. And I think you kind of alluded to it. This is the problems of South Africa, or the challenges, whichever way you want to look at that, are certainly not unique to that country, but that's where you're operating. And there may be people watching or listening to this thinking, we could do with a bit of that kind of thinking here. So what I'm curious to know is about some of the results that you're achieving from what you're doing, because I think it's so obvious, not just in your community, but I'm sure in a lot of communities around the world, how, for want of a better expression, reminding people of their interconnectedness is so important. So what sort of results are you seeing? What sort of effects are there from the work that you've been doing?
I guess you have to ask all the people that we work with. I'll answer your question by starting off just by saying that we chose the word, the trust connection, very deliberately. The evidence that we look for, the impact of our work, is often seen in an increased sense of trust. And that alone can mean 1,000 things, but it really does. There's a shift when I develop a sense of trust in myself, and this is a process. It's not something that is a finalized end result. I every morning I wake up and consider to what extent I trust myself and who I am, and the sense of what I can do, and the sense of a difference that I can make. So it's this interplay between trusting and connecting with myself, and trusting and connecting with you. And that's a continuum, isn't it? There's no end point to the level and the depth of the connection. So when we look for our environments that come out of our work, where there's an ease, where there's a bit more space, where there's a sense that as I'm triggered by the events that will trigger me as a human being all the time, a bit more space as to where I take that, a bit more choice. So it's just the NLP fundamentals, that I have a bit more choice about which tools I may use. And half the time looking really at myself as much as the people with whom I'm working. And the evidence comes out in trusting each other, in having faith, in seeing the best in each other. And this comes through in projects that we work with, and people really take these. It's so inspiring to see. It's such a real privilege always to work in these spaces and see people take the experience they've had through self-reflecting and trying out NLP tools straight into their organizations, straight into their community spaces, and just making them available, not in a sense of, in a directive sense, but in a very kind of clean Christian sense of just opening up spaces. And out of that, trust, we really see different levels of being able to work together, brainstorm together, because the creativity comes from that space. The creativity, doesn't it? It comes from where you breathe, and you can see the best in each other and allow things to flow. Then come all of the creative, now we can really make things happen and address some of the very urgent issues that are facing us.
What I love listening to you is that there's something very subtle, very quiet, and very respectful about this. There's no bells and whistles and big announcement of here comes transformation, but something much more subtle, and in my opinion, likely to be much more powerful, because I often talk about systems thinking. And if people are starting to trust, make connections, look at things slightly differently, then that affects those around them, whether they're in a community or whether they're in an organization. And it's kind of it's a quiet but still really powerful transformation, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, I think of the presuppositions that from NLP that really are alive in our space all the time is the mappers of the territory. So just respecting the diversity we have here, and we have 11 official languages. We have people living at every level of the economic type of demographic. We've got major political issues that test us all the time from a systemic point of view. And so the mappers of the territory keeps us honest and humble and respectful and aware. And, you know, as you know, opens up the doors for the diversity and the opportunity that comes from that. You know, so that's a mindset that really plays itself out. The other one is that we have all the resources, and everyone that we work with already has the resources. Yeah. Maybe they're not manifesting fully. As my coach says to me, they're not fully manifested. But they have that, you know, it's a respect and a beauty for what people already have. And I think that's why I'm in this space, because I get to see that and interact with such beauty. I like your word stillness. You know, I think that what I haven't yet touched on that comes through a lot in our work, almost like a guiding light for where we go to in the many different spaces in which we operate. We run coaching courses, NLP practitioner courses, we work in-house in organizations, private sector as well. Is the sense of, you know, what climate or experience can I create for you so that you come a little bit closer to your own sense of stillness, who you are, you know, your uniqueness, how you show up, not from an external, without anyone seeing you necessarily, but just the sense of yourself, the sense of your, you know, I don't even like to say best self, because it's not always best. It's the sense of you in with the one hand and the other hand, and you know, the positive and the so-called negative. And this, what we find really, that we've had a lot of success, as it were, with that direction. You know, as we're coming more into ourselves and finding our center, we can respond as ourselves. And that's something that we use a lot in our courses.
There's something incredibly powerful about someone recognizing not just their own resourcefulness, but recognizing that wherever they are in society, that they have the power to make a change, and that can ripple out. And I just loved listening to you, because that was exactly what I was kind of imagining and hearing as you're speaking, is almost waking people up to the difference that they can make wherever they are and whoever they are.
Yeah.
That's...
I mean, it's very much that, isn't it? It's out of the, you know, our NLP is you know, we're fascinated with the exploration that is available with all the models, and it's so much more than that. You know, these are tools that we're using and our way of being, really. You know, I guess that's our closest definition of seeing NLP, is what does it look like when I can truly live with the presuppositions being real in my life, in a way that does ripple out. And, you know, being that example is always going to be the strongest way in which I can influence and draw and attract and create the type of energy that is so much more than just myself. I've also been very surprised at how, it's wonderful to see how creative people have been that are using NLP in so many different ways. You know, we work with people who work in organizations that work in so many different sectors. I'm thinking immediately of some of the life skills and the mental well-being spaces with education and school children. I'm thinking of some of the more conventional education areas, early childhood, learner development. I think of organizations who work with youth and mentors. And each of them are finding ways in which they can take our NLP models and use them to create experiences and to really shift the impact of what they're doing. So it's a very applied sense of putting NLP right into the heart of things.
But it just occurs to me again, just listening to you, that when you awaken people to their own resourcefulness, and you give them this much, that's not me understating what you're giving to people in courses or in coaching, but I think one of the joys that I find in working with individuals or working with groups is once they're awakened to their own resourcefulness and what they can do, you give them this much in a coaching or in a course, and they do this much with it. And that's what I'm hearing you say, is that it kind of pushes open the door and say, here are some tools, but people can work out how to use those tools and really make a difference.
Yeah, and that comes from my presupposition that they have the answers, that they're going to use these in wonderful ways, that these tools are powerful. And I mean, that's exactly right. There's this low-hanging fruit where a little bit of looking inwards offers so many opportunities, especially if I haven't necessarily walked that path of reflection much until now.
Yeah.
And that's what we see really. It's that little bit making a big difference. We do have people who work with us who then come back for more and stay with us for years, and isn't that exciting? Because then you're moving and you're refining and just increasing the opportunity. And really, all of them. We mostly have people who are coming and doing our practitioner courses for the sake of to be able to apply in that sense. That's our space. It's that social transformation, an ability to just kind of add that toolkit into people's repertoire for the purpose, for the common purpose. This is what you're hearing me talk about a lot. We tend to attract people who have that sense, even if it's not manifested, or have that inclination or have an intention at some level, to respond, to look at their community and to find out ways of working with others towards these type of outcomes.
Oh. Charles, it's so inspiring listening to what you're doing, and actually really heartening. So speaking from the UK, what we see of and what we hear on the television, if you like, or in the newspapers about South Africa is, I suppose, very limited to, the political situation and the difficulties, and can only speak personally here, of course, but just listening to you, it's really lovely to know that behind all of that, there are people like you that are mobilizing people to bring something new and something healing into their community. I think it's lovely. I'm making a private wish here for some trust connections in other countries as well. I don't know if that's something, but you probably have your work cut out where you are.
Thank you. And I think what you recognize, it's a good example. What you see in me and us, you have at that level in yourself. It's your own intention, and that's the point. It's a universal, isn't it? I mean, we've got this, and we all, when we talk to each other in this way, we synchronize because we get it. This is important. There is that level of opportunity that's available. Yes, we do. I have a wonderful network, and the Trust Connection is very grateful and very pleased and very honored to be working with a wonderful set of trainers who themselves have played an important role in the development. Sue has been my teacher and has played a wonderful role, and some of the people that have worked with her come and work with us here at times as well. And I just, that diversity of trainers is also wonderful and gives people here an opportunity to learn from different trainers. And that's been a very important part in how we've grown and built. When I heard you talk, I just thought of community. That's what came up for me, because yes, we play a catalyzing role. Yes, we are able to make a contribution that has a ripple effect, and that's important. And it's back to your phrase around this sense of a field, not in an esoteric way, but in a very real, energetic combination of intention and effort that exists. And that is a real resource in our communities all the time. And I say, in my community as well, there's no distinction between my community and yours. We have these collective spaces. And we kind of all know that when we put our trust in what comes out of the conversations, with not thinking too much that, I'm responsible for creating that change myself necessarily. But when I trust and engage, there's so many very real opportunities that come up. And those opportunities translate directly in our space into hope, and into hope for a better future. And that's a very tangible thing. The people on our, I think, I think the sense of the people that we're working with is that life is important, it's fragile, it's beautiful, and it's worth making an effort and finding our way forward. It always interests me when people reflect, and I know that to be true, and I reflect on other countries. How do I form a view and an impression of what goes on? And I would say, I always go back to the basics, which is what is it from a minute to minute point of view that are my experiences that make up what I regard as a happy life, or the quality of my life.
Yeah.
And we find that there's a common denominator there, because we all have people around us. We have people with good hearts. We have people with good intentions who want the best for ourselves and for other people.
Yeah. And just on that, as I listen to you, the core of what you're doing is opening people's eyes to what their own abilities and their own resourcefulness actually is, and inspiring other people to do things with that for themselves and for their community. But that awakening of the resourcefulness of an individual is truly a gift. Charles, people I'm sure are interested to find out more about the Trust Connection. So if people want to find out more about the Trust Connection, how do they do that?
We have a website, thetrustconnection.co.za. I'd love to hear from anyone who'd like to chat or reflect. I always find that in these interactions like we're having now, so much more becomes available. Our view of the world and our mindset is that together we can do more. I am because we are, so we have our own sense of living that out. So I would welcome that. My email is charles@thetrustconnection.co.za. I'd like to just make one more comment, if I could. We're doing a really cool project, and I mention it just to inspire or to invite interest. One of the roles that Zainab and I play is having been recruited by the Western Cape Education Department to do NLP training in schools with teachers in a very coordinated way. And teachers work during the week, so we go on Saturdays, and we'll have all the educators from a school, 30 people, for 8 hours. And we do NLP introduction exercises and much more. And we go back on day 2 and day 3. And it's a very interesting project because it's been taken on by the Western Cape Education Department to roll out and to make NLP available to all the public schools in the Western Cape.
Wow.
And there are a few thousand of them. So you can see it's a multi-year project. And I mention it because it's been a fascinating way in which we engage with teachers and with education in a kind of a very focused way. And it shows another level of which, it's a good other example of how NLP is being looked at and used as a framework for people who want to shift the quality of what they're doing in different ways, in unconventional ways. So I'll let you know how that goes as we progress.
Will do, because I'm actually working with some schools here, and it's lovely to see that kind of recognition of what NLP skills can bring to people who are already skilled as educators, and how that adds to their scope and resourcefulness in working with young people. So Charles's information will be in the paragraph that accompanies the podcast, so his website and his email. And if all else fails, you can always get in touch with Charles through me. My website is www.florencemadden.co.uk. So thank you to Charles, and thank you to those who've been watching or listening. And I hope you'll join me next week to find out where I am in the world then. Thank you and bye for now.
Thank you for having me.